Hello, people of the internet. Voice of Beetle Man here, flying at you at relatively high velocity, approximately 200 miles per hour. Nowhere near the speed of light, of course, but faster than the average car on the freeway, for certain. On some platinum-plated wings today. This is going to be the third installment of Philosophy Musings by yours truly. And it's going to be the same layout as before, just kind of my thought process on various issues. Yeah, this musing has to do with morality and ethical theory, specifically issues in the quantifiability of good and bad deeds. This is something that's been kicking around in my head for a while, and this is gonna kind of pose as sort of a conversation starter. Hopefully, if anybody ever listens to this within the near future. But this is gonna hopefully start as or act as a conversation starter, a dialogue starter, and hopefully we can get some interesting dialogue going. I apologize for my quiet voice, and I have to be quiet because it's fairly late right now, and other people in the house want to sleep. Anyway, there's an issue that I have with it's a very specific problem that I've kind of whittled down. I've been kicking around for the last, off and on for months, but I really was able to not exactly formalize it, but definitely specify what I was talking about and what the particular problem is. And the problem pertains to ethical theory, and this is something that like I said, I'd love to get some dialogue on, some responses on people's thoughts. I must admit before going on that I'm definitely no expert in ethics, meta-ethics, or anything of that sort, moral theory, anything of that nature, and it's I'm definitely not an expert, and it's not one of my interests either. I don't particularly like ethics or anything pertaining to ethics or moral theory. That's just not my interest in philosophy. I prefer different areas in philosophy. I find far more interesting. I don't really like ethics personally. That's just my personal preference. But I feel like this is something that is interesting, and I'd like to see what other people think about it. I'm sure you all are familiar with this sort of statement when people say something along the lines of my good deeds outweigh my bad, something like that, or something like I've done more good in my life than evil, or I've done more right than wrong, or something along those lines, something of that sort. And it's an interesting thing once you pick that apart. What does that mean? Well, my contention, I'm nervous about using the word contention. My issue with that statement is it seems like there are two fundamental issues that you must resolve. One of them I think you have to resolve definitely to move on, but the other one is not maybe you don't, it's not so critical to resolve, but the first one it is. The first issue is the quantifiability of moral good and moral bad. So here's the issue, if I can draw an analogy. How do we tell if something in the material world outweighs another thing? Well, the answer is quite simple. You get a scale and you weigh them. You get a well-balanced scale, and let's say you're comparing two objects, and one's an apple and one's a weight, and you want to know which one outweighs the other one. You don't even have to know the specific weight in any particular unit of said object. All you have to do is place one on one end of the scale and place the other object on the other end of the scale, and whichever tips the scale on its side is the heavier object. So if the weight tips the scale and the apple goes up into the air, then, well, weight outweighs the apple, you might say. The weight is heavier than the apple, or two different things of fruit, or anything, a box of matches and a pencil, or whatever. And so you put these on the scale and you see which one outweighs the other, and you make your determination of the box of matches is outweighs the pencil, or the hand weight outweighs the apple, or something of that sort. That's easy. Now, how do we tell if something that is not material outweighs another thing? Well, you might ask, well, what do you mean by not material? Something that's not strictly material. And I know this is getting into a little bit sketchy philosophical territory, depending on people's opinions on naturalism and materialism and that sort of thing, physicalism, etc. But just hear me out. If you consider numbers abstract, and I don't mean in a Platonic sense as abstract objects, I just mean abstract in any sense, in a vague sense. I think you can agree that numbers, whatever they are, aren't material. You don't go out and spill your tea on the number 2 or trip on the number 7 when you're walking upstairs or something of that sort. You get the idea. Numbers are abstract concepts. Whether or not they actually represent real abstract objects or whatever is a debate that can be had later. And one of those that is of great interest to me, I might add, but that's not the topic for this issue. Let's just take numbers as an abstract object. How can we tell if one number outweighs another number, quote unquote? Well, we come up with an equation. The number 2 is greater than the number 1, so 2 outweighs 1. The sum of one side of the equation might be greater than or less than the sum of the other side, or equal to. You just, if you imagine parentheses, on parentheses kind of groups of equations on one end, and then on the other end, and are asked, are they equivalent? Are the sums of each side equivalent, or are they, if they're not, then which side is larger? And so on the first you might have, in parentheses 5 plus 2 plus 1, and the other one might be 1 plus 2 plus 3. Well, obviously, 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6, and 5 plus 2 plus 1 is 8. And so obviously the one on the left side, the 5 plus 2 plus 1, that whole grouping outweighs, quote unquote, the other grouping. It's greater. And so the way that we judge if numbers are greater or less than each other is they're quantified units, or in some way they're quantified. So an equation or sum of equations or sum of numbers is quantified in a very specific way mathematically. And the same thing can be done to material things like apples and anything. You find weights and fruits and pencils and matchboxes or whatever you might be weighing, pieces of gold and silver and grain, who knows what, can be quantified using various methods of measurement and definitions and that sort of thing. So you can quantify those kinds of things. You can clearly test which one outweighs the other one. So my question is, now that monologue's over, I apologize. My question is, first, how can you quantify good or bad? To say my good outweighs my bad, or my good deed, the sum of my good deeds is greater than the sum of my bad deeds in life, or in a particular setting or whatever. First of all, you must account for, it seems to me, that you must account for some way, you must have some way to quantify what a morally good, quote-unquote, deed is versus a morally, quote-unquote, bad deed. Some way that's discrete in a mathematical sense, because morality is an abstract concept too. Moral imperatives and ethical imperatives are abstract concepts. I think we'd all agree, just like numbers. And so, following that line of reasoning, there should be a way to, at least theoretically, quantify them just as numbers are quantified. Or at least in some way give some strict definition of what a morally good deed is and what a morally bad deed is. That's not self-contradictory in any way or something of that sort. And that would provide a way to determine whether or not one deed outweighs another, or one deed is morally good or morally bad, and then you can sum up how many morally good deeds you've done in a day or whatever, and how many morally bad deeds you've done, and then say, certainly look at the tallies at the end of the day and say, yes, today my morally good deeds outweighed my bad. I had 20 morally good deeds today and 12 morally bad deeds today, and so I'm in the green, as it were, morally. And it's not that simple, because even if you came up with a strict definition for what's morally good and what's morally bad, there's certain morally good deeds, it seems, that are greater than other morally good deeds. For instance, you might say it's a morally good deed to hold the door open for somebody, or to maybe pick something up off the floor for somebody that if they've dropped it, if they dropped a pencil or piece of paper on the floor, you pick it up for them. That might be nice. That's a nice thing to do. Most people say, yeah, that's courteous. It's nice. It's a good thing to do. Morally good. But if you were comparing that to a guy who saved a small infant or a toddler from a burning building, you might say that's definitely a morally good deed too. It's something that's morally good to do that. But people would say, if you said which person did the greater deed, the person who picked up the pencil off the floor for that person, or the person that helped that child out of the burning building, the majority of people, I think, would say, well, the guy who helped the person who helped the child out of the building did something that was morally good, but it was greater. It was superior good. So that would be something you'd have to quantify for if you believe that certain deeds are good, or certain evils, it goes the same, are more evil than others. So for instance, it might be a morally bad deed to gossip about somebody, or to spit a spitball at somebody. But that certainly doesn't seem to compare in moral badness to somebody like Stalin or Ted Bundy or Adolf Hitler, of that kind of level of certain things. Or certainly you'd say, well, somebody who trips somebody or who spits a spitball at somebody is not, they might have done something that's morally not good, but it's definitely not on par with somebody who murders or tortures people or causes mass genocides or something of that sort. So that would be something else to consider, is not only quantifying what just a morally quote-unquote good deed is from a morally bad deed, but also determining a structure in which to determine the superiority or inferiority of a particular deed to another. So for instance, how you would place a deed on a scale of, well, this is a morally good deed, of a particular level 10, which is really, really good, versus somebody else who's just picking up a pencil, which might be a morally good deed, but it's only a level 1. I'm using, obviously really vague language. I'm just kind of, just trying to illustrate the concept that I'm trying to get across. So that seems to be the first problem. The second issue, I don't think necessarily needs to be resolved critically, but it's certainly something to think about, I think, is the epistemic aspect. Even if you were able to provide a formalized system in which you could fully, or even partially, quantify morally, quote-unquote, good deeds from morally bad deeds, you'd still have the epistemic problem of saying, well, I've done more good in my life than bad. How would you have any sort of measurement of that unless you could get some sort of, even a probabilistic tally of your morally good deeds and morally bad deeds? Anybody could say that, but can you prove it? Can you offer any evidence? And saying that, well, ask my friends, they think I'm a pretty good guy, well, that's back to the vagueness problem. Well, they might think you're good, but do they use the same system that you've formalized? And the epistemic problem arises again of, how do they know that? Just because the general consensus between your friends in the majority of encounters they've had with you have been positive doesn't mean that you're, a good person, or yet you've done more good in your life than bad. A lot of serial killers have led on lives that people thought they were really great people, and they seemed very normal and to fit in well. I think it was Ted Bundy that went to, he hosted it might have been Ted Bundy, some serial killer. I think he hosted neighborhood barbecues or something like that, and people thought he was a really great guy, and then they found out eventually that he, had been killing people and torturing them in his basement for years, and nobody knew. And so it's the epistemic problem again, is how can you figure out, if you've, how would you offer proof for that? So that's my issue. Please consider it, and I'd love to hear people's feedback. Thank you, and sorry that the video took so long. Beetle Man out.